So hello everyone, my name is Emma, and my half of this webinar is about sustainable packaging design and materials. So in other words, how you can design to make a difference. So to start off, I'll give a little bit of background. I own a small design studio called Little Fox Design, and like I said earlier, basically I focus on green graphic design practices and sustainable branding and packaging in order to, help my clients basically share their eco-friendly values in a more concrete way through the product that they're creating. So my studio is carbon neutral, which basically means that I've tried to reduce my carbon footprint as much as possible, and then what I could not reduce myself, I've chosen to offset by supporting reforestation projects here in Canada, and also supporting the preservation of really old growth forests. So those 1,000-year-old trees, that's sort of the conservation that I'm helping to fund by carbon offsetting my business. So basically, my background in sustainability is a little bit atypical, I guess, because I don't actually have any professional training in design or sustainability. My university degree is actually English literature, and I just sort of cared about all of this stuff as like a hobby and on the side. So sustainability was always really, really important to me personally, and it was something that, I took a lot of time learning about and switching all of our like household things over to be like low waste and reducing our plastic footprint, and feeling really concerned about climate change and feeling really anxious about the future. And I wasn't really sure how to combine these things in my design work. And for me, it was sort of like, okay, great, I'm doing branding, but I care about sustainability personally, but my clients won't care about sustainable design, because, it's kind of only been in the last year that this has sort of been like an uptick in trending for design practices, which I think is really awesome. But a year ago, there wasn't really anything. And so I wasn't really sure that it was actually going to be successful. So I did a bunch of research, found that there wasn't much, and then decided to do my own research in terms of like forestry and climate crisis and recycling and materials and all of the like intricate stuff that goes into being a sustainable designer that wasn't just available to me. Like I didn't find any blog posts or anything. So like I sort of implied earlier, most of what I do is actually just driven by my environmental anxiety, because for me, this is like a way that I can make sure that I'm doing my best and making a difference and sort of having a positive impact on the world, even when the problems that we're facing seem incredibly scary. Oops. So when I was like a much younger designer, this is sort of how I viewed the design process. I would get a request from a client, and then I, the designer, would do something, usually on the guideline of the client, or a little bit in conversation with the printer for what they recommended for X thing. And then there would be an end result given to the client. After research, I have found that there's a lot more going on when you create something, and that these decisions are being made whether or not you're the one having any control over them or not. So these questions of forestry practices, paper manufacturing, natural resource responsibility, transportation, what kind of materials are used, the kinds of print shops that you work with, and then the actual life cycle of the item that you produce at the end, those questions are all being answered no matter what project that you do. So usually there's always going to be a path of least resistance to the project. So your client probably wants something cheap, and they might want something plastic. Or the printer might recommend something, like many printers recommend plastic laminate on business cards so that they're a little bit more sturdy and they kind of look glossy and they feel nice. So they're thinking about like the luxury of the product instead of the environmental impact of that piece of plastic being put out into the world. So these decisions about every aspect of sustainability with design are happening no matter what. So often like clients don't know this. So like I sort of feel that it's the role of the designer to be responsible and educate the client on the impact of their choices, because whether or not they need it to, if they're choosing something that is exploitative of the planet or people, that's obviously not the best choice. It's kind of like choosing fast fashion over, a more sustainably made garment. So I thought that I would start this off just by talking a little bit about what is sustainability, because I think there's so many definitions for it, and it can be kind of hard to understand what it means in terms of packaging and design and even just like economic focuses. So one of the most common sort of definitions of sustainability is one that includes economic development, it includes social responsibility, and it includes the environment. And I think that has a role, but I think that in its current practice, that role of sustainability has favored the economic side of things more than anything else in terms of our planet. And obviously, there's a lot of unsustainable resource extraction going on, especially to make plastics and paper that we use in packaging without making environmentally friendly choices about it. So I sort of like to define this more about like sustainability for future generations and making choices that are going to be like sustainable for the earth to basically accommodate us using that material. So I'm just checking my notes, make sure I get everything. Basically, I think that this is why we need to take a really close look at the materials that we choose, the production of those materials, and the actual life cycle of every single choice that we make as designers. So a lot of people sort of think that sustainability is about recyclable and whether or not the material can be recycled or not. So technically, we'll get into this a little bit later, but technically plastic is recyclable. Whether or not there's viability for that plastic recycling market is another question. But I think there's a lot of faith that people have that just when you put something in your blue bin or your recycling and it gets taken away by, you know, your local recycling station, that it actually gets recycled. And unfortunately, that's not the case, which is why we sort of have to have more responsibility for the decisions that we make when we're designing products and packaging. I think it's also important to understand that while you may be paying more for something that has sustainable packaging, not always, but sometimes, it's not actually a tax on doing business. You're really just revealing hidden subsidies and consequences in the other packaging that you would have chosen. Packaging is also really important because it's a reflection of identity of both the company and client that you're working for, and also of the values of the customers that are buying that product. People really want to know that they are investing in something that's sustainable. So we're going to start this off by doing a little bit of an overview about recycling because I think it's really, really important. So basically, our recycling system is a little bit broken. So what this means is that a lot of stuff that is technically recyclable doesn't actually end up being recycled because recycling is a for-profit enterprise and it's not just done for the good of the planet. So I think it's important to make a distinction when you're designing between whether or not something is recyclable, whether or not it's going to end up being recycled or not. So basically, when we design product, usually that's going to a consumer, and then they're going to be using it in their household, and then the packaging is going to be put in their local municipal recycling station. So something that is industrial recyclable, like mixed materials, plastics, you know, cardboard with laminate on it, that kind of thing, may not be actually recyclable in terms of a local recycling station. It might only be recyclable in terms of industry like waste that's being taken away that is sort of like an entirely separate stream of recycling. So it's important to know that like 30% of municipal landfill waste in North America is actually paper. So even if you're thinking that people are going to be recycling paper, sometimes they definitely won't be. So I think that's most of what I had to cover. So basically, sometimes materials are going to be labeled as recyclable, and they're going to say that it's industrial recyclable, and that's totally fine. But I think the important thing is to remember that we need to design for sort of like the least common denominator. So what is the most bare bones recycling system that your product or package could end up in? That's what you need to design for. So you can't be relying on the fact that your customer that bought your product is going to be in an area that that thing can be recycled. So in terms of plastic waste, unfortunately, only 1 to 3% of plastic is recycled. And of that 1 to 3%, it's all number 1 and 2 plastic. So if you look on the underside of like cartons and jugs and stuff, if it says 3 to 7, that stuff is just unfortunately going to landfill. Another sort of popular trend for plastics right now is like bioplastics and like biodegradable plastics. Unfortunately, those are basically greenwashed, except in a few exceptions, which we'll talk about later. But they require extremely extremely special circumstances in order to break down. So basically what this means is that you could have a compostable, biodegradable bag, but it still has to go to a special industrial facility at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time to break down. If it just ends up in landfill or it ends up in the ocean or something like that, it basically has the same life cycle as plastic and doesn't act any different. A lot of these materials are marketed as being like made of corn and stuff. And technically, yes, they are made of corn, but in the formula and the chemical composition of those actual materials, they add in a lot of plasticizers, and it actually ends up being a near identical component to regular plastic. So you're not really getting a huge benefit to that. There are exceptions like backyard compostable stuff, which we'll talk about, but it's one of those sort of like words that you should like pay attention to, because just because something is compostable or biodegradable doesn't mean that it actually like you can put it in your backyard and it will like break down in like a week or something. It's a pretty heavily industry greenwash term. Let's see. So more unfortunate facts. People don't reuse packaging and people do not recycle properly. So talked about this a little bit later, but people don't really wash out containers. They don't read instructions. They don't like really care about separating recycling. Even like in my apartment building, that's like technically a green building, you go look at the compost and there's just like plastic and like garbage in there. Like people don't care at all. And it's really depressing actually. But I think that we need to understand that in terms of when we're designing packaging to be sustainable, because, you know, people are lazy. And even if you like spend a lot of time designing something, you're like, okay, great. Like this packaging, you can like cut it up and then turn it into like a clothes hanger or something. People aren't going to do that. Like it's a nice idea, but you're putting so much more time and effort and energy into creating something that can be reused when people are just going to throw it out. So I think it's important to be realistic about what people are going to do and not try and sort of like bolster yourself up with like false ideas about what people are actually going to do with the packaging. So something also here is important to know is that like sustainable packaging doesn't just have to be part of the product or design budget. It can actually be part of your marketing budget, because if you're doing a lot of work into true sustainability and figuring out something that is recyclable and is properly certified and sourced, that's a huge value add to customers. Like they want to know that people are looking for sustainable packaging and they do want to make a difference, and they will pay more for a sustainable choice over something that's not. Let's see, talked about that. Okay, so basically the goal of packaging should be to have sustainable materials and as few materials as possible. Obviously you need to like keep the product safe and make sure that it's not going to get damaged in transit and that it stands out on the shelves so that it can be purchased. But the goal should always be to use as few materials as possible. So I wanted to throw in this element also because I think environmental racism in packaging is very much a real thing. And even though we as designers might not see those consequences, they are happening. So basically, landfills are often located near Indigenous, Black, or other communities of color. And what this means is that not only do they have less access to clean air and clean water, because it's often contaminated from the landfill, or the landfill is actually like burned regularly, so they're inhaling those carcinogens, but their health is determined by their zip code. So I think it's really important to understand, if you choose a plastic product and it ends in landfill, it's probably near a vulnerable community and it's probably negatively impacting their life. So something else to keep aware of too is that if you're choosing a plastic product, the actual sort of manufacturing facility for that plastic is, again, almost certainly near a Black or vulnerable community. And again, there's toxic runoff, and it contaminates the water streams, it contaminates the groundwater, and even just like growing land for crops and stuff. So this usually leads to really high rates of really rare cancers. So it's just important to be aware of like all of the choices that you're making do have far-reaching impacts, no matter whether or not you're seeing them or not. So yeah, I think it's important, like as designers, we have the option to advocate for choices that will positively impact people and the planet, and are breaking away from complacency in terms of, oh, everyone does plastic, it's the easiest thing. I think that we need to be aware of these systems that perpetuate human rights violations and really do our best to, stand up to them and make better choices. So there are some really common design things that most people do that they don't know is not recyclable. So if you have a spot coating on your paper, that is actually a plastic resin that's applied. A lot of it is marketed as being like UV spot coating and environmentally friendly because it doesn't have very much air pollution when it's created, but it still is a plastic resin that's put on the paper that's very difficult to remove. Metallics and foils are the other two. So the metallic inks often contain heavy metals that again pollute soil and water when they're disposed of because they're very difficult to recycle. And foiling, again, very difficult to recycle from the paper when it's put in landfill. Or sorry, sent to a recycling station. It usually ends up in landfill because of that. Basically how it works is like all the paper isn't sorted. So like it's just pulped, and if there's too high a percentage of plastics or foiling or any other mixed material, then the entire thing, the entire batch of recycling pulp is just sent to landfill because it can't be used. So here are a few guidelines for sustainable packaging. It's probably best just to screenshot this page or something. If you want the slides, you can always email me after this or send me a DM on Instagram. But I think it's just, a few things, like this is not a comprehensive list, but just a few things you can think about in terms of when you're choosing sustainable packaging. And we will be moving into actual sustainable material options that you can look into after this. But this, is it recyclable? Is it made using renewable energy? What are the inks used? Does it have any certifications like Forest Stewardship Council, which basically means that the forestry has been sustainably managed so that it's not just being clear cut. What is the CO2 impact of this? Does the company that you're purchasing the packaging from have any Environmental Protection Act violations? I was looking into this yesterday for Domtar paper, which some of you may know. They create cougar and lynx paper, which is very environmentally friendly, and they really sort of like push the ethics of their company. Turns out they have literally thousands of Environmental Protection Act violations, and they continue to do these every single year, and they just pay off the fine. So Instagram expose post coming on that soon, but like basically it's important to understand what these companies are doing behind the scenes. And then obviously, where is your product going to end up? What is its life cycle? Can it be recycled? Is it going to end up in landfill? There we go. So a final thing is that packaging can really build trust with your customers. So basically, if you are making an effort to put labeling and explanation on your packaging of the steps that you have done and the research that you have done to create that packaging, it is going to build trust with your clients. I think it's a huge opportunity to respect your customers and respect that they are wanting to make eco-friendly choices while also bringing a huge value add to your company. Again, it sets you apart from your competitors, and you're basically blazing a trail for sustainable business. So it's always very good to be extremely transparent and clear and proud of your sustainable achievements with that. Okay, so now we're moving into things I recommend for sustainable packaging that I think are really cool. So first we have waste-based. So their main products are a home compostable mailer, which is very cool. You can literally just put it in your backyard compost and it will break down. It will break down into material that has absolutely no microplastics and is worm safe. They also have this new thing that is like this poly mailer that you can see in the bottom corner there. And you literally put it in boiling water and you dissolve it, like you stir it for like, I don't know, like a minute or something, and it totally breaks down. It's like 100% water soluble, doesn't leave any microplastics behind. Super, super cool. I really want to order like their samples just so like I can try it myself. But I think that's a really, really neat way of sort of elevating your sustainability game and making sure that, it's been properly researched and vetted and doesn't leave behind any microplastics. Another option for compostable mailers is No Issue. They're also very cool. I will say their website is a little bit hard to, they don't have a lot of information about their sustainability. It's a little bit confusing to navigate in terms of that, but their products are pretty reliable and they do backyard compost. They also have paper tape and forestry certified tissue paper. So a lot of people get it confused and they think that the tissue paper is recycled, but it's actually just certified in terms of forestry and where the pulp is coming from, which is still really good. The thing I like about No Issue is that they sort of have low minimums. You can customize the branding and it's really, really easy to use. Now we're going to talk about some of my favorite paper stocks that you can use for packaging. So the next three things I'm going to talk about are from Mohawk Paper. They're a new line that they just put out about a month ago, focused on sustainability, and I just think it's really, really neat. So I'm going to focus on the three coolest papers that they have. So basically, this is paper that's entirely made out of like residue straw from farmers that are just growing it anyway. So usually at the end of their growing cycle, they have to end up burning the straw because they have to clear the land for the next cycle. So basically the straw is reclaimed material. It's diverting waste from incineration. It's reducing CO2 emissions because obviously it's negating the burning. And it uses 25% water and 70% less energy to create, which is really cool. They also, like for this paper, the pulp mills are paying extremely fair wages to their employees. So starting jobs start at $20 USD per hour, which is really neat. And not something that I see a lot of like companies talking about what their starting entry job pay is. So you can see there's two different types of this wheat paper. They have like this whiter colored one and then this more golden one. Both of them are completely undyed. It's really neat. Beautiful, beautiful, rich colors from all of these stalks. So these ones are 30% wheat and then 70% Forest Stewardship Council certified paper. So that just means it's sustainably harvested and grown. And basically that means old growth trees aren't being cut down for the paper, which is really important. So the next paper is hemp paper, which is, again, really, really neat. Hemp is a rapidly renewable resource. It's extremely high quality for packaging, and it has a much lower energy and water cost at the same time. So basically hemp only takes 90 days to grow to maturity in terms of then it can be used to create the paper, whereas trees take anywhere from like 8 to 30 plus years, which is a substantially longer time and much more unsustainable. So basically for this paper, it's the stalks of the hemp. So the leaves are usually just like sent to the CBD industry and the stalks weren't being used for anything. And so this is, again, reclaiming material that was just going to waste. Again, you can see just like stunning texture and stunning colors, completely naturally dyed, no artificial bleaching or colors added. And our last one is recycled cotton, which is really, really neat. I mean, I think all of this is neat, clearly. So basically, this paper is made out of cotton t-shirt trim waste and also blue denim thread waste. So literally from old jeans. Again, no natural, it's all natural colors, no dyes or bleaching. It diverts fabric from landfill. It's incredibly sustainable, and there are no harsh chemicals used to create this paper. It has a very like neat texture, so it almost like feels like cloth, which as I was researching this, I found out that US dollar bills are made from 75% cotton and 25% linen, which is really neat. And so basically this paper feels like dollar bills. Very cool. So all of these papers are available on like Mohawk, and you can get like a sample kit and stuff. I am not like paid by them. I just think it's really neat, and I'm waiting for like my sample kit to come in the mail. So I'm very excited about that. But I think they're just like really high quality options for packaging, and I can't wait to see and work with them myself in terms of packaging applications, just because they are such like thick, beautiful stalks that can create such an incredibly high quality product. Oh, I didn't mention, so this is 100% recycled cotton, this paper, and then the hemp is 30% hemp, 30% post-consumer waste recycled paper, and then 40% Forest Stewardship Council paper. So not all of them are 100% recycled paper or 100% from the material, but they are assumedly doing their very best to have as much of that percentage in there as possible. So these are a few resources that I know of in terms of packaging. I will say both of these are not fully researched to the extent that I would want them to be, but they are a good source in terms of like a starting point. So neither of them have really clear information about bioplastics or compostable plastics, and there's a few sort of like newer plasticking types that are industry-led that haven't really been verified in terms of life cycle or industrial recycling. So they're a good starting point, but like I encourage you to do like your own research on each option that they sort of talk about. But they are good starting points. And then here's my pitch. So basically, I have a webinar replay because I made a typo in that slide. But I did another webinar for marketing yourself as a sustainable designer, and a little workbook on how to do that. That's available. The replay and workbook is available on my website for 20 Canadian dollars. And then I also have a course on green graphic design that I'm working on, hopefully to release in August. And there's like a wait list for it that is like no obligation to actually purchase the course. It's just when I start actually being able to promote it, you can know when that's happening. So you can sign up at that tiny.cc/ecofox link. It will just take you to the email sign up form. So those are like the cool things coming from me right now. And if you have any questions, if you want the slides from this presentation, feel free to follow me on Instagram and like message me, and I'm happy to send you them. I also share a lot of like environmental and design information and education on my Instagram. It's like a huge passion of mine. And so yeah, feel free to like engage with me there also. Thank you. Okay, I guess I should check if there's any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen. Can I paste the link to the waitlist? Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was just saying there's a lot of really great questions that I've been seeing popping up in the chat box.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I guess I'll start at the beginning. I'll paste the, okay, I'll go paste the, I'll paste the link to sign up in the chat box so you guys can have that, and then I'll go through the questions. Okay, so do you have any printer, paper, or packaging companies that you recommend to work with? So definitely Mohawk Paper, Neenah Paper, which is Neeanah. I'm terrible at spelling things out loud. Neenah has some really cool options. They also have cotton paper options. Neenah Paper is really cool because they have some really low cost quality options that I often like recommend for my clients that have smaller budgets. So they have this paper called Sundance Felt/Smooth that is available at my local printer, and it's like comparable price to just like traditional virgin paper. So I always like send my clients that way in terms of that for business cards when they don't have like a huge budget to do something super fancy. So Mohawk and Neenah are probably like my favorites in terms of paper for design projects that I actually use. I historically have said that Domtar paper was good, but now we know they actually are not. So don't recommend that anymore. How do you display all of that information effectively on packaging? So basically, like, you can create labels that are like, you know, the calorie labels on like food that you buy. So like here, I have a chocolate bar that I can demonstrate, but you know, they have like the whole calorie labels, and then, you know, information like there, like this says Cocoa Life. I'm assuming that maybe means that it's environmentally friendly, but they're not very transparent. So, you know, just finding a little place on your packaging where you can actually talk about what it's made of and how to recycle it. I know that that's not like standard or required, but I think it would be really cool if designers, we started to set a standard for that, because it's really just another piece of the design. You know, on my new business cards that I haven't printed yet, but I'm waiting to print, I even put like a little icon just saying that the business card is made on recycled paper. You know, it's kind of a design choice to add that information in. How do you convince your clients to choose the best solution for the planet, even though it's more expensive? So that one's tricky. It depends on the client's budget. It depends on the client themselves. Usually if someone is really, really wanting like plastic or something, I just go through the whole explanation of what that actually means. And honestly, most of the time they don't know, and they're kind of shocked, and they're a little bit upset at the end. So sometimes you just need to upset them about their choices and what that means. And then sometimes it involves doing a little bit of extra research just in terms of, you know, finding something that's within their budget. Sometimes you have to, you know, make a few compromises in terms of, okay, well, this isn't recycled, but it is, you know, certified in terms of forestry. And that's the best solution that you can come up with for them. I find though that just taking an educational approach, like the majority of the time, works out, just because people don't know and they aren't thinking about it. And they're not intending to do something that's bad for the planet or people. They don't know, and they think it's fine. So that's my best tip, is just educate them. And if they're really being a pill, sometimes you can't win every battle. I've had some clients that just like won't, no matter, even though they know that I'm a sustainable designer and that's what they chose to work with and it's in my contracts and all that stuff. Sometimes you can't win every battle. And that's okay. I think it's just about really trying your best, and no one's 100% perfect with sustainability. It's entirely impossible. So just do your best and it will be fine. Any good label companies? I have some that are in my bookmarks somewhere, and I will go through them and I will find them and I will create an Instagram post. So if you would like good paper labels, I will create an Instagram post soon that has them, because I definitely have them in my bookmarks, but I didn't put them into this presentation and I can't remember anything right now. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I think I got through all the questions. Thanks everyone. I'm excited. Hopefully that all made sense. And of course, like, feel free to connect with me through social media or anything. If you have any other questions, I shall turn the floor back to Lauren.
I actually have a question that I was thinking of while you were talking. I've personally had a lot of clients that try to lean more eco-friendly, but they're working with a really small budget. They don't want to do, traditional sustainable packaging. So they opt for glass instead of plastic. Mm-hmm. But the trouble with glass is that the caps on whatever packaging they're using is often plastic. Mm-hmm. So my question is, with glass packaging with plastic lids, do people have to separate them to recycle it? Like, what if you threw the whole thing in the recycling? I'm just curious what happens after something like that gets recycled. Does it end up just in the landfill because it has plastic on it?
Yeah, so basically that depends on the kind of municipal recycling that's available. So actually where I am, there isn't glass recycling. They stopped doing it this year, and it's super depressing. But I can take like liquor bottles to the liquor store. Usually sort of the glass is like melted down, and like depending on how complex the municipal recycling system is, sometimes the lids need to be taken off and put in a separate like glass versus the recycling. If your recycling is all in one, so glass and like metal and plastic together, then it's fine. Like, it's probably they'll have like some kind of system to sort glass versus packaging out. Sometimes they have like lasers that actually like detect what the material is made out of and sort of diverts it. Sometimes it's hand picked by people. So it's really depending on local facilities, which is why it's important to sort of like understand your own local recycling, and then think about like what the possible denomination is for everyone else. But I think with the plastic lids, even if they don't get recycled, the glass will be, because it's infinitely recyclable. So the waste associated with the plastic lid is so much less than the entire amount of plastic from the bottle, that it's still a more sustainable choice. I know that Velis, which is like a spray, a household cleaning spray company, they have a refillable aluminum can that has a plastic spray bottle on it, and they've made the plastic spray bottle transparent, because that is the most high quality recyclable plastic in demand right now, because it means that they don't have to re-dye it or do any kind of extra like bleaching process to get it to be a different color. Fun fact, that no black or brown plastic is ever recyclable. It is always the lowest quality plastic, and gets totally sent to landfill, which is why often like, your plant potters and stuff are all like black plastic, because it's literally the lowest. It's been recycled multiple times and is incredibly low quality. So little details like that too, in terms of like what the type of plastic is you're using for the lid, not always available, but I think I'm just rambling now. I don't know if that answers your question, but like, I think it's so dependent on the local facility that it's probably harmless in terms of like glass and then like 1% plastic, because it is also about like ratios for contamination.
Got it. Yeah, thanks so much. So Does anybody else have any questions? We'll probably stick around for just a few more minutes just in case anybody thinks of any questions. But yeah, thank you so much for everybody that was here to watch this webinar today. As I mentioned,